The page jammed halfway out of our printer, with my wife's name seated beside a man I'd never heard of. Marcia Bennett, Elias Porter. Row 3, seats 7 and 8. My name wasn't anywhere on the page. I had only opened the printer because I needed a copy of our homeowner's policy. Instead, I was holding a professionally formatted seating plan for 28 people at the Hawthorne Civic Gallery here in Springfield, Missouri. The date was the following Saturday. Marcia had already told me she was spending that Saturday helping her former supervisor, Bonnie, sort donated supplies for a church pantry. At first, I figured the page wasn't hers. Marcia had spent 30 years doing office work for the city parks department. People still asked her to print things. Then I saw the small marks beside certain names. Vegetarian, wheelchair access, presenter. Beside Marcia's name was a handwritten blue check mark and arrive by 10:30. I knew the handwriting. She had confirmed she was going. There were numbered rows, a podium assignment, and a note about keeping several chairs near the front clear until setup was finished. Nothing said what the event actually was. Marcia came in from the backyard 20 minutes later. I slid the page beneath my insurance papers. You still helping Bonnie Saturday? Yes. All day. Probably until 4. At the church? She opened the refrigerator. Where else would we be? That answer bothered me more than the man's name. I waited until she went upstairs, then looked at the seating plan again. Hawthorne Civic Gallery. 10:30 arrival. Elias Porter beside my wife. And my wife had just told me she'd be somewhere else. I'm Calvin Bennett. I'm 67, and Marcia is 63. We've been married 36 years. Before retiring, I managed purchasing for a commercial flooring company. Marcia handled permits and scheduling for the parks department. If somebody came to me upset about a decision, my first instinct was usually to ask what the choices were. When our daughter once considered quitting a miserable job, Marcia asked how she felt. I asked how long her savings would last. Our daughter said, "Dad, could you be a person for 5 minutes?" I thought calculating rent was being a person. After finding the seating plan, I began noticing things that had been sitting in plain sight. Small cream-colored place cards. Marcia had been folding them at the dining table for 2 weeks. I'd assumed they were for Bonnie's church. Now I picked one up. Each had a thin green stripe along the bottom. The seating plan had the same stripe. That evening, Marcia carried a shallow cardboard tray from the spare room and left it near the stairs. Inside were more cards, sorted alphabetically. I didn't dig through them. I didn't need to. The top card said, Elias Porter. Under his name, in smaller print, Riverstone Project, Fabrication Team, Riverstone. I knew that name. 21 years earlier, the city had converted an abandoned riverside pump building into a public environmental education center. Marcia's department had coordinated permits and volunteers. My company supplied flooring at cost, and I spent almost a year on the project's materials committee. Riverstone had been one of those projects people talked about proudly for a while, then stopped talking about all. I remember contractors, city employees, architects, donors. I did not remember Elias Porter. The next morning, Marcia found me looking at the blank place cards. She gathered them without comment. Bonnie's church. I asked. Her hand stopped for half a second. Then she said, "They're for something else." 2 days later, I had to pick up replacement blades from my lawn edger from a hardware store downtown. Hawthorne Civic Gallery was 3 blocks away. I didn't follow Marcia. I didn't even know she'd be there that afternoon. But when I passed the gallery, her blue Subaru was parked beside the loading entrance. I circled once, then parked in the public lot across the street. Through the gallery's glass front, I could see people arranging chairs. Marcia came out carrying a box of cream place cards. A man followed her. He was tall, maybe my age, with gray hair and a heavy mustache. He took the box from her and said something that made her laugh. Then he set it on the hood of her car. Marcia picked up a name card. Elias Porter. So that was him. He stared at the card longer than anybody should need to read his own name. Marcia said something. Elias looked away. Then she reached up and touched the side of his face. Just Briefly. He caught her hand before she lowered it and held it between both of his. They stood like that for several seconds. Then he pulled her into a hug. I had spent most of the week telling myself there were reasonable explanations. Watching another man hold my wife's hand made those explanations harder to reach. Before leaving, I looked through the gallery windows again. There were 28 chairs. On several seats sat small wooden blocks, each about the size of a brick. Some were painted. Others were bare. One had a metal hinge attached. Another had a strip of blue tile. They looked like scraps from a construction site. Elias carried one to front and set it beside the podium. Marcia stood behind him with the place cards. I drove home. When she walked in that evening, the seating plan was waiting on the kitchen table. Marcia looked at the page, then at me. "You found it in the printer?" "Yes." She sat down. "Who is Elias Porter?" "A man I work with on Riverstone." "For how long?" "Years ago, and again recently." "Are you having an affair with him?" "No." She answered so quickly that I believed her before I wanted to. Then she told me what Saturday actually was. The Riverstone Center was being renovated again. During planning, the new director discovered that the original permanent display credited department heads, contractors, and committee members, but left out many of the people who had physically built unusual parts of the center: temporary workers, apprentices, volunteer fabricators. The city wasn't holding some grand apology. 28 people had been invited to a private recognition session before the updated public display opened. Marcia had spent 4 months helping reconstruct the contributor list. Elias had worked on the original fabrication crew. The wooden pieces on the chairs were surviving samples from Riverstone's first exhibits. Each omitted contributor would be seated beside something connected to the work. Marcia was Elias's event liaison because she knew him from the original project and had interviewed him during the reconstruction. He was holding her hand. He was looking at his name on an official card for the first time in 21 years. I sat back. For maybe 20 seconds, I felt ridiculous. Then I saw the seating plan again. "Why did you tell me you were helping Bonnie?" Marcia didn't answer. "And why aren't I invited?" She rubbed one thumb along the edge of the paper. "Because your name was never missing, Cal." I stared at her. She continued quietly. "You're on the original Riverstone display." So you're also the person who prepared the list they used." I remembered the list. Near the end of the Riverstone project, the city asked our committee for names to include in the permanent display. The records were a mess. People had come and gone. Contractors brought assistance for a few weeks. Volunteers rotated constantly. I cleaned it up. That was how I thought of it. I used payroll sheets, contracts, and final committee rosters. If somebody had an official role or stayed through completion, I included them. Elias Porter wasn't there at the end. He left for another job, I told Marcia. "Yes." "So why should I have listed him as final project staff?" Marcia looked at me carefully. "That's what you thought they were asking for." "What were they asking for?" Instead of answering, she brought one of the wooden blocks from the spare room. A section of blue tile was fixed to one side. I recognized it. Riverstone's original water cycle exhibit had a curved wall covered in thousands of broken blue tiles. The first contractor couldn't make the backing hold the weight. We were already behind schedule. Then one of the temporary fabricators changed the support system. He built a lighter aluminum grid behind the wall and divided the tile surface into removable sections. I remembered watching him demonstrate it. Quiet guy, heavy mustache, even back then. "Elias," I said. Marcia nodded. He had spent 6 weeks redesigning that wall with 2 apprentices. Then his regular employer called him back to a long-term job. Riverstone opened on schedule partly because his system worked. But he wasn't on the final crew, I said. Marcia gave me a tired look. 21 years earlier, she had asked me almost the same question. What about the people who built pieces and left before opening? I remember my answer. If they're not final staff, they'll make the list impossible to verify. Now Marcia slid a photocopy across the table. It was the original request the city had sent our committee. At the top One sentence had been underlined. Please identify individuals whose work made completion of the Riverstone project possible. I read it twice. The next morning, I asked Marcia how the reconstruction had started. The new Riverstone director had found workshop notes, supplier records, and old exhibit components while preparing the renovation. Names kept appearing that weren't on the permanent display. A small team began interviewing former contributors before comparing those memories with the old list. They didn't want your list deciding who mattered before they asked what people actually did, Marcia said. And because I made it, you didn't involve me. At first, that part one could follow. What about after you finished? She looked down. I could have told you, but you didn't. No. Why? Because I remembered how fast you turned the same question into employment status 21 years ago. I wanted Elias and the others to see the corrected names before you started arguing about criteria. So you lied about Bonnie. Yes. And then I'd already lied once. The next time was easier. She didn't dress it up. Elias didn't hate me. His daughter and 2 grandsons were attending the private session. He'd told them for years about building the curved blue wall. Now his name would finally appear with the people who had built it. Nobody was removing my name. The private event was for the previously omitted contributors, current organizers, and reconstruction volunteers. The public opening would come later. You could have helped him without lying to me. I could have. And the church pantry? A lie. I looked at the photocopy again. Made completion possible. Then I looked at the list I had created 21 years earlier. Permanent staff. Official contractors. Final committee. Marcia gathered the place cards on the counter and put them back into their tray. I didn't attend the private event. Marcia didn't ask me to. Saturday morning, she packed the cream place cards into a cardboard tray. Before leaving, she stopped beside my chair. I'll probably be home around 4. Okay. The following weeks weren't comfortable. Once, Marcia told me she was meeting the Riverstone director to finish the public display captions. I asked, "Do you want me involved?" She thought about it. Not yet. All right. A month later, the renovated Riverstone Center opened to the public. Marcia and I went on a Tuesday afternoon when it was nearly empty. The curved blue wall had been restored. Beside it was a new panel listing the original fabrication team, Elias Porter. 2 apprentices. A tile setter I vaguely remembered. Several names I didn't. My own name remained on a separate committee panel, exactly where it had always been. Marcia stood beside me. I didn't ask whether Elias had liked the private event. I didn't ask what he had said about me. We walked through the rest of the center and went home. That evening, Marcia cleared leftover event supplies from the dining table. Blank place cards, green striped cardstock, a box of adhesive dots. At the bottom was the seating plan I'd found in the printer. She held it up. "You want this?" I looked at it. "No." "Shred it." I took the page from her. It already had a crease down the middle. I folded it once along the old crease. Then I dropped it into the recycling bin beneath the counter.